got to have Sean Rose. He's going to be talking to us about the stories making news this week. Sean, what's happening?
Greetings, Edgeranka. Greetings, viewers. Tonight, we want to look at the Computer Misuse and Cybercrime Act 2013. This act should receive further readings when the House of Assembly convenes this week. Now, the enactment of the legislation, we were advised, follows the misappropriation and misuse of private and confidential information in the BVI in April of 2013. Particularly by the ICIJ, that's the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists based in Washington, D.C. And the first reading of the act came in January 13, of this year, and it caused much alarm. In fact, after that, the House of Assembly may have had, its initial discussion then, but the public went awry wondering why did the government have to go in that direction. Now, the local and regional media sources, and of course I saw some myself, suggested that the act was leaning on some sort of a muzzling of the press and would have basically sought to criminalize legitimate free speech, which really wasn't the case. The Computer Misuse and the Cybercrime Act really seeks to provide a comprehensive approach to deterring and punishing illegal activities relating to cybercrime and misuse of information. And there was initially a code that guarded against such practice, though it didn't go to that extreme. In 1997, the BVI Criminal Code of 1997 covered certain provisions of the criminalizing of certain acts of computer misuse, and the local authorities thought it was time to go beyond that to prevent another situation that occurred in April of 2013. And the act is really expected to assure investors, relevant stakeholders in the financial services sector in particular, of course, not just people who are in the financial services sector, but also you and I who may have information that we may deem private and don't necessarily want someone to hack into our computers and then use that information for whatever interest or purposes that they may have. And the data is now being protected under this law, and no one is allowed to access that information without our permission, without the permission of the owner or the business, as the case may be, and then publishing it, as we saw in the case of the ICIJ so-called leakage of information.
Well, before I get to the questions I really want to ask, Sean, I want to ask you, what media houses, can you name a media house, an international media house that has been concerned about this bill? Because I keep hearing about these international media houses that are concerned, and I haven't seen any names.
Well, international for sure, as it relates to, well, the fact is once something is published online, you can say it's international. But I've seen reports of it published in Caribbean newspapers. I wouldn't necessarily name, but because I don't want to be I want to be subject to correction. I'm not sure if it was the Caribbean News Now or the Caribbean Journal, but I did see that article published, and I don't think it was in the opinions section either. So it could have been a report submitted by one of their journalists.
Was it a concern that the journalists had that it was going to have a negative impact on free speech?
They made references to that. They suggested that the BVI was probably, let me use that word, probably moving in the direction of criminalizing or at least muzzling the press. It's a very tricky road to walk there, because I don't recall those articles suggesting that they were criminalizing free speech, but that they were suggesting that there would have been some muzzling of the press.
It seems to me, from what you just said, that the bill was born out of the fear of destabilizing the country through the misuse of information, for fear that persons doing business in the BVI would stop doing that business because their privacy won't be protected. Is that a fair assumption?
Precisely, and not just as it relates to financial services, which would be the first thing on anyone's mind when they hear of a situation like this. But as we pointed out a while ago, it could be your personal business information. And in fact, I can give you a case in point, because Jamaica passed a similar bill, a similar law in 2009. In fact, that was December of 2009. And December 18, 2009 to be precise. And the government said that it was making this law possible. In fact, it was enacting this law to ensure that the nefarious activities that were being conducted across the country would be addressed. And now, what activities are we talking about? Groups collecting personal data and using it for financial gain. In 2010, 2 persons were charged. So the bill was passed in 2009, December, and by September 2010, 2 persons were charged. And what were they charged for? They were seen acting suspiciously in a motor vehicle outside an automated teller machine in Manchester, Jamaica. And the men were accosted by the police, searched, and electronic devices used to intercept transactions and to duplicate personal information and identification numbers and so on were found in that vehicle. And the customers of the respective ATMs, unsuspecting customers, would have seen monies disappearing from their accounts had these guys gotten through with that. But these guys were charged, and the devices, of course, were confiscated by the police. That was a regular practice in Jamaica, and the government couldn't really, charge those people who they found participating in those activities with any degree of seriousness in as it relates to the committing of the offense.
What part of the legislation that's causing such a consternation in the territory regarding censorship or curtailing of freedom of speech?
Well, again, I really don't know, and I've been trying to understand why some people are concerned that this is a bill or an act that seeks to muzzle the press, because at the end of the day, if anyone in the press is being muzzled, then that is probably a disposition that they would take upon themselves. I don't see anyone muzzling me based on what I have seen. What are they
pointing to? What are they pointing to? What is the local media pointing to in the act that whether it's misinterpreted or not, that is giving them concern, cause for concern?
I would suggest that based on what I have seen, read, and heard, that the clause in section 13 of the bill that reads, a person who is found guilty of committing an offense under the act in subsection 1 A is liable on conviction on indictment to a fine not exceeding 1 million or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 20 years or both, or subsection 1B is liable on conviction on indictment to a fine not exceeding $500,000.
What specifically in those sections
this really speaks to what the very media persons who say they are concerned are talking of, where they are saying that the fact that this particular aspect of the bill, which refers to unlawful publication of computer data and child pornography, is pointing to the publication of information, they feel threatened, and they are suggesting that maybe they are being muzzled. But again, if you look at the bill, if you look at the clauses and the various sections here, in particular clause 13, you won't see, if you apply a legal mind, you won't see anything that speaks to that.
So as a reporter and as a person in the media yourself, it seems to me as though you are saying that that concern is unfounded regarding the act?
I think it's misguided, and I'll give you my final example why I think so. The Observer newspaper recalled, after that conviction I spoke of in 2010, that the case of a 26-year-old computer science student, and his name was Philpott Martin, who was accused of hacking into the system of telecoms giant Digicel and stealing more than 10 million Jamaican dollars in calling credit, was only charged with 3 counts of simple larceny and 1 count of conspiracy to defraud due to the lack of that cybercrime legislation, because that incident took place prior to the passing of the act in Jamaica in 2009. So when I read and I saw this particular act here in the BVI, what I saw were provisions to protect individuals, organizations, companies, and what have you, from having their data, their information being published without their permission, and also as it relates to issues pertaining to child pornography, and of course we are going deeper into issues related to defamation and slander and libel and so forth. That's how I interpret this law, and if I am wrong, then I would definitely stand corrected.
I'm happy for that, Sean, because I talk a lot, and and certainly I'm concerned that I'm not curtailed from saying the things that I need to say and that I want to say. So
But this is besides the fact that prior to this bill, we should know that anyone speaking publicly ought to make sure that they are speaking the facts whenever they speak on any issue. And of course, as it relates to libel and slander, you ought not to libel and slander anyone intentionally, of course. And we should speak responsibly. And of course, Matavius, who is head of the financial services sector, spoke to some issues when he delivered his remarks his speech, his lecture at the HLSEC recently, calling for more responsible issuance of information and publication of information. So it's
Well, I'm looking forward to certainly a comprehensive news report coming up this week on that matter. And of course, we know that the legislation is coming up in the House on Thursday. So we should have some interesting debates and discussion surrounding that, and the news certainly should be reflecting that discussion, that debate. Thanks for that.
You're most welcome.
That fine presentation, Sean.
Spotlight is brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, the BVI Tourist Board, and CCT Global Communications.